She had known from a very young age that she wanted to go into the medical field, but she eventually realized that she would have to settle for being a nurse. She had spent many years getting her nursing education before she was ultimately hired as a nurse at a hospital in London. She had known from a very young age that she wanted to go into the medical field, but she eventually realized that she would have to settle for being a nurse. There, she had her first contact with the man who would eventually become her husband. His name was William, and he was a charming and friendly doctor. After meeting for the first time and falling in love almost instantly, they decided to get married in a little under a year. Victoria was happy to have wed a doctor, and she continued to work at the hospital while also lending whatever support she could to her new spouse in their new role as a married couple. However, things were not quite as they seemed. It didn't take long for Victoria to realize that her spouse had a murky past, which was angered her. He had a thing for prostitutes and he would frequently disappear for extended periods of time, which resulted in her being left all alone in the house. She tried to ignore it and persuaded herself that it was only a phase, but it became clear very quickly that it was much more than that. While assisting her husband in the operation room, Victoria initially noticed that something was wrong with her health. She didn't give it much consideration at the time, but a few weeks later, she started to feel sick. When she realized what her husband did to her, she was taken aback, and was in a state of complete disbelief. Her husband was responsible for her contracting a venereal disease, which would lead to a steady decline in her health right up until the moment she passed away. She was shocked and enraged by what he had done, and she was determined to get revenge on him for it. She was adamant that he would pay for what he had done. She was aware that he was participating in sexual contact with prostitutes and that as a result of his behavior, he had contracted the disease from them. She came to the conclusion that the best way to exact her vengeance would be to assume the persona of a man, Jack the Ripper, and carry out her plan to kill prostitutes who were unaware of her intentions. Victoria was fully aware that she may be captured at any moment due to the high-stakes nature of the game they were playing. She started searching the streets of Whitechapel for the perfect victim, and she continued doing this for a period of time. Her planning was very meticulous, and she went to great lengths to eliminate any possibility of being caught. By now, her mental state was starting to be affected by the disease. Her very first victim was a young girl by the name of Mary Ann Nichols. For a number of days, Victoria had been keeping a careful eye on her and was patiently waiting for the right opportunity to take action. She lured Mary Ann into a dark alley, where, after the two of them had a brief conversation, then executed her in a swift and efficient manner. After what can only be described as an exhilarating experience, Victoria quickly came to the conclusion that she had found the reason for her existence. Victoria's murderous rampage didn't stop then, it carried on for the next few months more. She became more and more daring as time went on, even going so far as to write letters to the authorities in which she taunted them about her criminal activities. She was successful in evading capture, but she was acutely aware that it was only a matter of time until someone uncovered her cover story and revealed who she really was. Her disease, in the end, was what ultimately led to her demise, and was responsible for her passing away. The state of Victoria's health continued to deteriorate day by day, and by the time she had reached her lowest point, she was unable to even get out of bed. She had reached her rock bottom. She passed away in the comfort of her own home, surrounded by the medical books and equipment that, in her earlier years, had brought her so much joy. In the years that followed Jack the Ripper's atrocities, the legend of the man known as the Ripper gained more and more notoriety. People talked about the savage killer that roamed the streets of Whitechapel and carried out his depraved acts without any concern for the consequences of his actions. The truth, however, was slightly more challenging to deal with. Victoria was a lady whose husband was cruel and unfaithful, and as a result, she was driven to the point of despair and insanity. When she reached that point, she sought her retribution in the only way she knew how, by killing her husband's tarts. Her history was never discussed, and as a result, everyone will remember her solely as a loving wife and nurse, never any in connection with Jack the Ripper. Residents of London continued to speculate and ask questions about the identity of Jack the Ripper for a good number of years to come. Others thought he was a member of the royal family, while others believed he was a doctor. Still others believed he was a politician. Despite this, no one ever guessed that he was actually a woman who was disguising herself as a gentleman. As more time passed, the myth of Jack the Ripper assumed a less significant role in the annals of history. On the other hand, Victoria would never be able to forget the misery and humiliation that her husband had brought her during the entirety of their marriage because he was the source of those things. She had found a way to take control of her life, and despite the fact that it had led to tragedy, she had been able to exact some measure of retribution on those who had wronged her. She had found a means to take control of her life, and she had used it. In the end, the legend of Jack the Ripper, a sinister and enigmatic person who had captivated the imagination of the general public, would be Victoria's lasting contribution to the world. However, she would be remembered as a brave lady who had been driven to the edge of her boundaries but had opposed her oppressors with everything she possessed. She was remembered as a valiant woman. Thanks for watching.